Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started for today's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Lindsay Van Weergen, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing here at the International Institute for Analytics, also known as IIA. Welcome to today's webinar, Human-Centered Transformation, Driving Analytics Adoption. In case you're new to IIA, we are a research and advisory firm. We were co-founded by Tom Davenport and our CEO, Jack Phillips, almost 10 years ago. We work with companies to grow their capabilities, improve performance, and get the most impact from analytics. This webinar is part of our ongoing series that highlights important concepts, techniques, and strategies in the world of data and business analytics. Our clients rely on IIA to provide unbiased insights, a range of perspectives, and a network of independent analytic experts and practitioners. For more information about us, visit IIAanalytics.com. So before we get started today, I want to go over a couple housekeeping things. First off, we want your questions throughout the presentation. Actually, we love your questions throughout the presentation. So you'll see a chat window, and I've messaged everybody already. That's got a quick note in there from me. But what you'll see is this is where we want you to go ahead and submit your questions. So please go ahead as they come up, go ahead and submit them, and Bill will do his best to get them asked with Ahmer throughout the presentation. Also, like I mentioned a little bit ago, we will be sending a recording of this webinar out tomorrow. So that will be in your inbox. We don't send the slides, we do send the video recording with the audio, so you should be good. I am so excited today because we are not only hosted by IIA's Chief Analytics Officer, Bill Franks, but we also have Ahmer and Don in the room today with us. This is going to be a fantastic presentation. A little bit about Bill. His focus has always been to translate complex analytics into terms that business users can understand and work with organizations to implement their analytics effectively. His work has spanned many industries for companies ranging from Fortune 100 companies to small nonprofits. Ahmer is a data and analytics senior executive with over 20 years of experience driving organizational transformation. His experience includes leadership roles at Nike, Wells Fargo, Sonic Automotive, and Cambria Health Solutions. Additionally, Ahmer has done analytics consulting for PwC and Quero for clients like ESPN, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, Liberty Tax, and ADP. Ahmer holds 2 MS degrees, one in industrial engineering and economics, and one in mechanical engineering from Jamia and Salmiya, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong, in New Delhi. So, Ahmer, we are so excited to have you here, and Bill, I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right, thanks, Lindsay, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today. As many people know, there's a lot of discussion these days around how to deliver analytics more effectively and increase the adoption. We've worked with Ahmer in a couple of his roles. I've gotten to know him over time, and I think he has some really good insights into this topic. So I encourage you, as Lindsay did, to ask questions in the chat panel, and we'll take some as we go as well as at the end. And with that, I will turn it over.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, folks. Thank you for joining, and really looking forward to engaging in this dialogue. I think the time really is right to have this dialogue about driving adoption of analytics. Since I think Tom's book that came out, Competing on Analytics, and analytics truly has a huge upsurge in the marketplace, and a lot of investment has gone into this new domain for a lot of companies, and but many places, and I talked to a lot of my peers and colleagues, there are a lot of hurdles and challenges that people are still facing as far as driving adoption and finding that footing within an organization is concerned. And I've seen statistics anywhere from 80 to 87% of data science projects not making it into production, and some of which, again, maybe by design. And then also, if we think about it from all of our collective experiences, like how much of our work that we have done, at least in my case, 20 plus years, I mean, I can count number of projects or data science projects that I have led that have made it to production and then have driven impact versus those that struggled with many issues that we will discuss in this conversation. So as part of the conversation that we are about to get into, I'll say that like what I'm proposing here or the process that I have learned to use over time comes from making mistakes in the past, right? Learning from those mistakes, driving incremental successes, and kind of building off of that. So we will get into that. What I like to do is start with a quick story of Ignace Similarwise. And a fairly well-known story at this point, but it's good to always kind of ground in that. And Ignace Similarwise, for those not familiar with the story at a high level, was a Hungarian physician. And back in the 1840s, when the childbed fever-related deaths of infants was very high in Vienna and Hungary and those places. And it really disturbed him, and to the point where what was going on essentially is that the death rate for the newborns in the wards that were managed by the doctors was over 3 times higher than those managed by the midwives. So Ignace started to do some research and identified that a lot of the doctors were working in also cadavers as part of their medical research and then going from there to childbirth. And this is before the antiseptic or even the theory of germs even was there, because this is much before Louis Pasteur came along. So Ignace, as a simple test, basically asked doctors to start washing their hands. And you can see on the graph up there, post that intervention, the percentage of patients with deaths went down almost to below 5%, between 0 to 5%, down from a high of 30 plus. And he was excited about this outcome. He couldn't explain why, because again, the theory of germs didn't exist back then. And he tried to make the hospital systems and doctors change their behavior. And it was backed by data and his research. But he was laughed at. He was mocked. There was a lot of resistance. It did not fit any of the existing paradigms from medical research that existed at that point. And he just couldn't explain why. So the scientific and in the medical community completely rejected his assertions or change of this policy, even though it showed remarkable impact directly. Over time, he struggled really with driving this adoption, this change, and he literally went mad and died tragically in a mental asylum. I would consider him to be the patron saint of data scientists, if we were to say that. Much later on, again, once the theory of germs came along and everything, and now he's considered the pioneer of antiseptics, because that is the first antiseptic approach to it. So what that leads to is this metaphor, Semmelweis reflex, which I'll kind of quickly read through, is our human behavior characterized by reflex-like rejection of new knowledge because it contradicts our existing norms, beliefs, and paradigms. And we all live and breathe that every day. It's a human nature. It's human nature to reject something new that may challenge an existing norm. And if we think about it, like 170 years later, Tom Davenport and New Vantage Partners, a couple of years back, they did their big data executive survey to assess the impediments that are the driving factors behind lack of adoption of analytics in organizations. And their findings essentially were similar to the challenges that Ignace Similarwise faced 170 years ago. Like, this is the challenge that all data science and analytics executives to this day are facing. And we look at it at a high level, it's insufficient organizational alignment is at the top, followed very tightly by the lack of middle management adoption. And if we dig a little bit deeper into that, like, why is that? It's alignment in the sense that the analytics and data science is still struggling to find a footing because it's not set up right. It's the organizational alignment to the business and that structure and the strategy. It's not set up right. It's still seen as it's just side investment. We will see what kind of value we can get out of it, and I'm speaking more for non-digital native enterprises. Digital native enterprises, there's a different approach to that, right? Business resistance, which kind of speaks to again that reflex of and the urge to kind of a fight back. Anyway, because change is hard, right? Technology resistance, inability to create shared vision, and lack of governance policies. And we all have been and continuing to go through the process of data governance issues around data quality, garbage in, garbage out. So we'll kind of speak to some of these. So learning from, again, my past mistakes, looking at experiences or learning from the experiences of the other executives, especially verification of our shared experiences in this survey also led me to actually development of a process that I like to follow in the leadership roles that I have taken to drive adoption of analytics at enterprise level. And it really comes down to these 7 steps. Number 1 is culturally grounding the strategic vision. So analytics as a function has to have a vision and a charter. Without that vision and a charter and a North Star, it's going to be really hard to rally the troops to move forward with that. And I think a quote I like from The Little Prince, the book, is that if you have to build a boat, don't just build a team and then give people orders to go cut woods and then trim it and put it together to build a ship. Actually, make them pine for the life of the ocean, for the life of an explorer, and then allow them to build a boat that best serves their understanding of that vision, right? So make them pine for that. So having that North Star is critical. Honing it into the cultural awareness of an organization is another critical element of that. Excuse me. What I mean by that is every organization has a currency. Understanding that currency of that organization is important, and tying analytics strategy and vision to that currency essentially ensures that the strategic vision of analytics aligns with the strategic vision of the corporation. So, for example, in case of Nike, when I was there, it's a brand and product-led organization. So we have to ensure that brand and product are part of that vision. Excuse me. Adoption-driven organization structure, we'll get into that. Multi-level business partnerships, and it speaks to how change management has to be driven at multiple levels, because analytics, in a way, is a change management exercise. People, data, and technology as enablers. It's a critical element. They enable accepting that we are an enabling function, and which opens us up for a little bit more humility and vulnerability coming to the table, brings a little bit more, build more trust and transparency with the peers of the different functions. And focusing on the winnable problems, and I'll speak to that. Driving and measuring value, again, things that we all currently do and like to do, and then impact-centered storytelling. And storytelling is another very critical element that I've seen, at least from my past mistakes, that is a very, very, very critical element to driving it. An example of the vision, I'm sorry, I'm having some allergies this morning, so an example of the vision So when I was at Nike, understanding that culture and cultural currency of the organization was very critical. So this is just an example of the vision statement for the analytics function that we developed. Start with we serve the athletes. This connects into Nike's core maxim, and with Bill Bowerman's very famous quote, if you have a body, you are an athlete. It's honing in into that. So it gives a sense of purpose for why analytics is there. We are there to enhance intuition because it's a business that has been built on guts and intuition over time, and we have to respect that. It's the world's number one brand, biggest brand, and we have to understand and respect that. And coming to the table with that sense of clarity and humility is critical because it opens up more avenues for that dialogue and learning. And how do we deliver that? Value of analytics with actionable insights, with the focus on actionability. So we are moving the organization forward. And by building and developing data-driven systems, which comes down to driving business and organizational transformation with data and technology. So given that example of the vision, the next step comes into how I have approached development of my teams. And we hear a lot of talks about hiring and then bringing in full stack data scientists and PhDs and then doing all of these things end to end. And what I have learned over time is that aiming for that unicorn only slows things down because there's an opportunity cost that we are incurring by trying to build an organization like a perfect organization from the step zero. So again, building it incrementally has been extremely valuable and then successful for me. So from my team perspective, what I like to do is build a team that is built on trust and transparency with the end user at the center of it, which is kind of starting to talk about the human-centered design as a concept here, right? So I like to build my Scrum teams from the ground up with the end user at the center of it, and start of any initiative with the end users, basically building the product for the people, with the people, right? So we have those folks integrated with the process itself from the beginning, and it allows for that transparent conversation. So it's not being seen as an us versus them. So quickly kind of going over that, so keeping the user at the center of it all. Data evangelist, that's a very critical role in the organization that I like to set up. And again, I'm keeping the title a bit generic here. Data evangelist, what McKinsey might call translators, and in my case, I like to hire MBAs with quantitative experience and expertise in the background. They have worked for analytical organizations or consulting. The idea is that they can speak two languages. They can speak the language of strategy and then be able to connect the dots with the business and then build that rapport with them. And they also are able to translate that into analytical languages, right, and have the understanding of it. They can also do quick ad hoc analysis so that they can build that relationship with the business. And then the idea is that let's start the relationship on trust and start to leverage data to perhaps starting with proving the existing beliefs before we challenge the existing beliefs, right? Within the Scrum, then I like to have data wranglers, and these are anywhere from data engineers or analysts, people who can pull together data from any sources, anything from writing basic SQL to even scraping web data as and where necessary. We have data scientists and then storytellers. So, excuse me, the idea is that we are delivering as part of our sprint cadence continuous stories from the data. We are learning, we are munging and putting the data together. We are applying science on it iteratively, building hypotheses, and then we are visualizing the outputs and the outcomes that we are sharing with the business. And it's that trust-based system that's allowing us to build a better system over time.
Hey, Ahmer, could I ask you a quick question here? One thing that I think people might be interested in is, do you view these roles as outlined here as literally always being a dedicated, is a role equal to a person, or is a role that needs to be covered? And you might have a person who's covering some data science and some data wrangling, but it's one person versus an official org chart position. How do you?
Yeah, that's a good question, Bill. Thank you for asking that. And quick clarification: these are not people; these are functions and roles. So you can have 2 people playing these 4 roles. I mean, I've had those before. And for larger organizations, I've had teams of up to 6 or 7 in a squad with multiple people playing multiple roles. So again, for me, my perspective is, again, these are responsibilities of a team versus a specific number of people.
Yeah, and there's a question that came in from the audience as well that I think is a good one to hit on at this point in time. So as you talk about, some of these roles are evolving, obviously, and are starting to require some new skill sets. The one question was about your view on the balance of retraining / upskilling existing employees versus hiring fresh in order to fulfill these needs. And
that's a good question. It depends on the organizational maturity from analytics perspective. If you're in a space where you're coming in brand new to an organization, you have to kind of get some quick wins just to gain momentum. Then bringing in a specialist definitely helps a lot. As the maturity of the organization moves forward, and truly believing that having a data literate community is more critical to driving transformation than many other things. I do fully agree. And actually, for my especially at Nike in my Scrum teams, I did have folks who are interested in becoming data scientists over time. And with a understanding and participation and agreement with the management of those functions, we would bring folks into the team. Again, upscaling is critical because you really do have to start to build up from the company itself because of the level of experience and expertise about the business that a lot of these folks have.
Great. And there's another one that came in I think we should hit while we're on this page. And I think I know what your answer to this one will be, but I'm not going to tell you. I'll just see. The question is the data storyteller the same as a business subject matter expert? That was the question.
Not always. What I've seen is that, and it can be, but what I've seen is that there is an art to storytelling, and honing in into the concept of information is beautiful. Information can lie and also mislead. For a company like Nike and couple of other places, what I have actually brought in are experts in the art of storytelling itself, who then connect with the end user, in that case in the center, and work with the domain experts to craft out a story and visualize it in a way that sticks. It doesn't mislead. And actually, we have done, in certain cases, journey mapping of information consumption with the stakeholders to see how they think about consuming information, what type of information or data they like to start with and where they like to end. So it's a combination, and I would say it can be that a domain expert could potentially play that role, but I've seen that we can either upskill that with some training on storytelling, and there's some great trainings available nowadays, or in certain cases, in larger enterprises where you do have the ability to bring in a talent. And again, when I've had the specialists in storytelling, they're not completely dedicated to a squad. From a Scrum squad perspective, they can actually float around different squads as and where needed.
Great. I'm going to toss one more out at you that came in, and I think we'll move on just for sake of time, and we might come back to a couple other ones. One question that I think is a good one in terms of putting a little bit of extra context, and this will be interesting, is the difference between, or the similarity of, a data wrangler versus a data engineer.
Yeah. In the beginning of the stage, I did not put the data engineers here, and what I have done is what I like to do is, again, there is a difference. So in the beginning, what I've seen is that a lot of the time data science is struggling because the data itself is not set up or structured on the back end to do analytics or modeling. I mean, I keep sometimes execs are like, hey, there's this deep learning going on. Why don't you guys do something about it? Help us see what you can do. Well, data is not labeled. We can't do anything unless the data is labeled, right? So data preparation and getting it ready for analytics is a very critical component. And along with that, there's a component of exploration. And exploration allows us to provide, number one, like bring exploration and a combination of storytelling, demystifies and opens the data and basically have the business users, the end users, see what's really there in the data, what the data is telling. So for me, the data wrangling is very specific to that data analyst kind of a function. Machine learning engineers or engineers kind of come into play. And again, data engineering is part of that, right? So it's a combination to me. Machine learning engineering is more when we have something ready that needs to move on to at-scale development and deployment. And then for that, those are, from my perspective, are sort of the shared resources that can be brought into a squad as and when that particular squad is ready to move on to that part of the project. Okay. Yep. So next slide, I quickly talk about the multi-level partnership, and it's essentially a formula for success for me has been is aligning and then setting up an engagement model that is set up to address each and every level of organization that we're dealing with from a functions perspective. So you'll see that the analytics leader sits at the top of the pyramid on the organization for the analytics because it's a single focused entity, but that particular leader has to go across many different business functions, which is why the pyramid is inverted on the other side. So not as focused, but you're trying to drive that alignment, strategic alignment across the board, right, with all of those business functions. The next level where we have the analytics execution managers, the product owners in some cases, this is a very, very, very critical component. And if you go back to the survey that I shared, that middle management resistance was one of the biggest components. And what I've also seen is that these detractors, if managed well, and again, brought into the process, understanding what their concerns are, addressing those, some of these can also become biggest advocates. So driving the advocacy from that middle management up and the middle management down is critical. The other component, then again, at the bottom is the analytics execution team and end user domain experts. So again, as I talked about in my previous slide, I like to bring end users and domain experts into the Scrum in the beginning of the project itself, and sometimes even before that, and I'll speak to that later on. And this is crowd seeding the value and the demand of analytics. It's having these end users essentially influence the middle management, your analytics execution managers driving turning essentially the middle management into potential advocates, understanding and evaluating what is detracting, what the issues are, and addressing those, and then analytics leader providing the top level coverage, and then also one of the hardest jobs because you're going across the board there. And then also the analytics leader also has a very difficult job here because under every business has a power domain structure in the C-suite. Understanding and aligning to that power domain structure is very critical because without that, analytics will struggle. And I talk to a lot of my peers and colleagues where they run into hurdles like the moment analytics starts to gain momentum and starts to uncover truths that may not be easily digestible by certain organizations, and then the power play starts to happen from budgets and headcounts and a lack of participation and collaboration. I was talking to a colleague of mine just yesterday where he was talking about how the moment analytics started to gain momentum and they started to address some issues, he started to get disinvited for some of these senior leader meetings, right? So we have seen that. So these are difficult issues to deal with, and we have to embrace at analytics executive leadership level that we have some of the hardest job, because not only we have to deliver these technical products and then built with all of the rigor, but we also have to embrace our role as change leaders and change management. And we can't do it alone. And I've seen a lot of the times, and including in my case in the past, that without building a collaborative team and advocates in the organization to help and support, it will be hard. And I can say take advocacy. So, for example, build a partnership with, if you have an organization within the firm that focuses on Six Sigma, bring lean coaches into your process, understand the process. If there are FP&A departments, build partnership with them, because they can help with strategic finance, build business cases to help with asking for investment. Or even before a big initiative is started, they can help assess what the potential value could be. And having a finance function kind of partnered with the analytics function to build that provides more credence to that. So when it goes to CFO, it's actually coming from CFO's own organization. So it allows that dialogue to be a little bit easier. So again, that is why that multi-level partnership across the board is very critical. Next slide, I'll very quickly hit, again, data is enablers, because we have seen and consistently seen that data in most organizations is still not structured to drive analytics, and this comes from Forrester. I've also seen a lot of the analytics is still being done typically directly on systems of engagements or systems of records, and systems of insights truly have to be driven, and partnering with the CIO, the CTO organization to come up with a vision for what analytics needs is critical. And that need and requirement has to be driven by analytics organizations. They are not going to solve that problem because they don't come from that background, that experience, right? So we have to have that partnership. So honing it into that, so this is just a visual of a couple of places where I've built analytics data warehouses, and it's essentially what we want to do is right time and right size the data. If you're driving business decisioning at real time, then yes, you should be building a data warehouse for analytics for real time decisioning. But if your business decisioning is at weekly level, that makes sure that your data is set up for that weekly level updates, right? And build this over time with use case after use case. Bring data, evaluate a use case, deliver a use case, bring additional data, master it, govern it, clean it. And over time, we will build these data assets that will drive that economic value for the firm. And I've seen it a few places where this has been done very, very successfully. But just like dumping all the data into a data lake without a whole, basically like use cases kind of driving it, leads to a lot more problem where data scientists end up spending most of their time cleaning just the data itself. Two truths to analytics is kind of basically just really acknowledging that analytics is a journey and it's only a part of the answer. And it's just honing it in on that art and science has to be brought together, and art being the business and then science being what we bring to the table, right? That partnership is critical. Analytics is a journey. Again, this is a ladder that again, most of us have seen many times, but understanding and acknowledging in the sense that as a data science or analytics function is being set up, or whatever maturity curve it is in an organization, the question is where we are, right? If the focus is the business is not really ready to understand or use predictive component, like what will happen, then we need to make sure that we first nail the descriptive and the diagnostic. And of course, we can do things in parallel on the side, not saying that we kind of go in a waterfall way, but it's focus and what we are delivering to the business to bring that acceptance and trust. And change is very disruptive. And And analytics is driving change, and disruption is hard. And again, as I said, like when data starts to speak, and we're trying to start to streamline and automate and optimize like these inefficient business processes, or tell the truth, I mean, it can lead to some issues. So ensuring that sense of alignment and understanding with that maturity is critical, so that we can come in with the right approach based on that. Next one, coming from like basically summarizing from some of the earlier slides, looking at the vision, organization structure, setting up the Scrum teams or the project teams. In the end, an understanding of the organizational culture and currency should lead to an analytics charter. And this is an example that I'm putting here. It's a bit generic, but foundation again is the world-class analytics team and analytics literate business community. And driving analytics literacy is again a critical role that we have to play. And in fact, in some of the organizations, I have put up to 10% of our goal for the organization to drive analytics literacy by starting data science coaching classes and in internal sessions. In certain cases, we have also owned Tableau and Alteryx licenses to allow and then handed them to the departments that were still doing a lot of Excel-based work, just to kind of free them up and start to bring them closer to doing things with more streamlined, data-driven way. So that's critical. Next, sorry. So again, so from there, that charter, we can figure out the focus, how much to be internally focused and externally focused, and then what we are driving as the top of the pyramid. Changing the gear a little bit now to human-centered design. So just a quick definition on that. So human-centered design is a philosophy that empowers an individual or team to design products and services that address the core needs of those who experience a problem. So if we read this statement, there are a lot of parallels and similarities to data science and analytics, what we are trying to do. There are a lot of similarities and connections to agile that many of us are beginning to embrace. So given that there are so many similarities and then the challenges and the impediments and then the failures that I've spoken to, the approach that I have now been using for the last 7 years or so to drive success or successful implementation of data products is human-centered data science is what I call it, but not the first one to use that terminology, and many other processes I've seen exist along this line. With this, the critical component, what I like to highlight is big battles that are big enough to matter and small enough to win. So if the business question is very ambiguous, so for example, if the business question is that would we be today we are a $30 billion company, would we be a $50 billion company in the next 20 years? It's a very vague question. And analytics as a starting point, in my opinion, shouldn't be picking up any of these vague strategic questions. This is a very strategic question. But if they say that we want to be a $50 billion company, can analytics help us understand what are the drivers of the business today? What are the potential likelihood of these drivers moving over time, and how that might impact our strategic goal to become a $50 billion company? So that's it. So in this case, and it's actually, this is a real example that I have dealt with in the past. And through this dialogue, converting that to like, no, we shouldn't be answering whether you can be a $50 billion company. That is strategy, right? We can help enable that decision or that process, and then with data, but we're not going to solve that. And then quickly, getting into that human-centered aspect of it, which is has a lot of parallels to the science process as well. The cycles of convergence and divergence that we go from identification of the problem to discovering, ideating, iterating through multiple options, and then refinement and eventually validation and implementation. These are the typical steps that human-centered design follows, typical step that any innovation lab operates in, and it also has a lot of parallels with data science. So what I like to use is basically this approach in my project planning as well. And at each step, there is an impact-driven storytelling, which ties really well with the biweekly sprint cadence too. And then the output of that is, even in the research phase every 2 weeks, again, time bounding of research is also critical, is having a story that comes out of it that continues to drive the momentum. And the other thing I will mention is that human and machine are not two separate things there. Human and machine work together. So in this case, it's the people, data scientists, and then the end users being part of the entire journey end to end. So from this,
Hey, Ahmer, real quick, just one or two quick questions that have come in. I think in one, so to summarize, what you're saying is you see there's a connection between the human-centered design process with Agile, but you see them as two distinct things, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then one question that had come in around the distribution of the results was if you saw value in building and promoting some type of an analytics gallery, or whether that was a website or some other type of mechanism, so that people can be informed of what's possible to help them think of their own ideas.
Yes, and then that's actually, I'm going to talk about that. So here too, that is one of the components of this Discover Diamond that I have here, is that concept. And actually, each quarter and also before each start of each year, I like to also host these analytics gallery type or the deep dive discussion. Actually, one of the things that we have done is with my sort of the business analytics managers also start to collect and gather ideas, basically seeding them from the business itself, and starting to have those put together so that we can start to plan accordingly. Not sure if that's answering the question, but and also when I was at Cambia, there's an internal website where people can, anywhere in the company, can start to put in, submit their ideas and what they would like to see. Okay. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but so in the interest of time, just quickly moving through. So this is, go back. So this is the process at a high level that I have created that I like to use. And if you think about it, so it's the first two are essentially the meta diamonds. If you think about that, it's the understanding phase. So Discover component of that slowly comes from management consulting practices. So it's going into the business and then hosting these game storming truly in a design thinking way. Like, let's just start about understand the people, empathize with the audience, and understand the pain points. And let's not put the burden of whether this is doable or not, that's later on our job in terms of what is feasible or not, but let's actually explore, right? So through that continuous process of ideation and refinement and exploration is where we continue to sharpen the questions, right? This highly exploratory process allows us to understand and then hone in or nail on business problems. Again, pick battles that are winnable. It allows us to hone in on that and then bringing the end users. And actually, in this case, I like to bring in all the way multiple levels of folks from the organizations together, because there are organizations themselves don't talk to each other. Communication is hard. So I try to at least create an open environment and a transparent environment where we can have that interconnected deep dialogue, right? So from there on, once we start to land on some key question, and then it goes to that key decision moment of assessment of the potential business value. So this is where I like to partner with strategic finance to start to build what type of value we could potentially drive for the business with these types of initiatives. Let's say we start with 20 ideas, and out of those we cull them down to to 10 or 7, right? And those then goes to our rapid prototyping process, the meta diamond, which is again a highly iterative process between ideation and POC. And I like to mention that the end users or domain experts are part of this process end to end, from the beginning all the way. They're part of the sprints, they're part of the demos. And I can speak to many case studies where that has been extremely fruitful. Like, we would build a model that is just really crappy model, and we would laugh about it together. And then just a simple laughing together at a bad model or how off it is, which most of us models are together, it breaks so many barriers between the business and the science. It demystifies things. It humanizes us all, right? It makes us vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to that trust. So that continuous again cycle of again, everything is on a 2-week sprint. So with that, we would kind of get to maybe down to, let's say, 2 ideas that we want to explore kind of potentially building. Then again, the key decision moment at that is to prove the business value, again, that we have done through POC and multiple iterations, aligning to the leadership stakeholders, again, addressing the alignment question. Most organizations or all organizations have a strategic goal for the year, so aligning to that. And assessing business readiness. And in many cases where we are addressing a transformation of an organization's business process, even in the POC, rapid prototyping phase, this is where I've also engaged lean coaches to go in and start to assess the business process itself to see where and how analytics can potentially come in, where we can streamline the process, where the decisioning can be impacted by this data-driven systems, right? So having all of that information allows for that highly informational conversation with the senior leadership to gain their support. The moment that we gain the support is when we move into that full product development mode to materialize, and this is where it goes into this very standard Scrum process, because now we know what we're building. So it goes through the whole dev and deploy process, and then from there it then DevOps component of it all, basically product management, sustaining, enhancing, and sunsetting as and when needed. Quick case study I'll walk through. So an example.
Hey, Ahmer, just a real quick clarifying question. I think just a quick answer for someone. Someone did ask, if you go back to the last slide, that you mentioned Kanban or Scrum on the left side, but only Scrum in the middle. Did that imply that you think that only Scrum should apply in that middle, or was that just general illustrative points?
It's just an illustration, and actually the arrow I'm attempting to point more towards the dev and development and deploy, because that to me is really truly Scrum, because we know what product we are trying to build at that point. I have seen that the exploratory component of the data science, especially in the beginning, Scrum tends to fail, and I have my own personal experiences with that, given the nature of the exploratory work. Kanban has worked very successfully, at least in my experience, for that component. And I've also learned from the design teams, like the UI, UX, and they typically also use Kanban, given that the nature of that exploration is very similar. And the other thing I like to do is also allow the teams themselves to pick what approach they want to use. If they want to approach Kanban, it's up to them. If they want to use Scrum even for the beginning phases, it's really, I let the teams kind of decide, because they know the best. Yeah. Quick study here. So this is from Nike. So we were really trying to set up, basically transform the business planning process. So initially understanding the existing process. A lot of that was Excel-based, and don't pay attention to numbers. These are just illustrative examples with dummy data. There's nothing real in here. The massive spreadsheets, some of them would take like 4 hours just to load, and multiple versions existing on SharePoint, and people loading and uploading and downloading. A very convoluted process, complete break. A lot of the forecasting was also gut-based, experience-based, not as much mathematically honed. So first step we did was understand the pain points, looking at where we can drive the value. And again, this is not a data science exercise yet, and then sometimes we have to do that to gain the momentum. Incremental value, building trust, showing the value, right? So change management as a tactic. So we took that spreadsheet-based approach and brought in a combination of Alteryx and Tableau, brought in our own team of data engineers to kind of basically look through back-end sources and then put a database instead of pulling it into Excel, and visualize all of that to the planners. Now, we have saved significant amount of labor hours here. So that in itself is a win. Back-end, we have more clean, governed data that is consistent across the organization and all 200 plus planners that are using this data. So we have, now again, that's a big win. And this also allows us to now start to expose new and additional data that can help decisioning. And again, we're still enhancing intuition-based decisioning here. We're not adding science yet. And then on the top right, initially we put in the forecast that they were putting in, and then over time, with some convincing, we replaced that with a simple moving average-based forecast, which everybody agreed with, because in the beginning we had 20 different ways or 30 different ways of forecasting that people were using, but at least we're all equally right or equally wrong in this case, right? Then came the conversation about informing and in helping the planners understand what a statistical forecast is, right? So this is a simple visual I had created to teach them without using any math on what forecast is. And it starts with, if we want to learn something in science, we collect data, we come up with many competing hypotheses, and then we reject those that are just outright wrong, right? And then we continue to collect more data, more experiments, and then with that, with the rejection of the bad hypotheses, we come up with essentially potentially two solutions, and then rule of nature, rule of law, Occam's razor is whichever one has the lowest number of assumptions, or life is usually simple, is usually the right approach. So let's reject the one that is most complicated, focus on simplicity, so that we come up with our version of a theory, and then we compare against the truth. Science has it hard because science is seeking truth. Data scientists have it a little bit easier because we know the truth, because we have the history of the past. So we compare our theory or our best version of that truth against the past, and that allows us to evaluate our measure of accuracy and measure of error. And then what I did after this simple explanation of forecasting is that with the measure of accuracy, then I created like a sensitivity table with saying each additional percentage of accuracy in forecast leads to potential this much revenue. So now we are quantifying. And then also quantify along with that, if we build a business process tool that is more exceptions driven, so you're not forecasting everything, but only 20% of the SKUs. So that drives labor hour that we're going to save in the process, and also allows the planners to focus on things that are more difficult, where they can actually use their own business experience to plan those products better and allow the models to basically plan the rest 80% over time. So it's building trust over time. So with that, then we already have the tools, we already have them using it, and we simply replaced on the back end that moving average based forecast with our statistical forecast. Then over time, we incrementally improve the forecast from an time series, ARIMA, to Arimax, to then semi-supervised learning, LST, and deep learning. So continue to bring more and more rigor to that process, but without truly impacting and having to go back to the drawing board again. And I sometimes like to call this the Trojan horse approach of driving analytics adoption, and that has worked really well, at least for me, successfully in the past. And again, user being the center of it from the beginning. So lessons learned for me is at a high level, like ruthlessly iterate. Fail fast, fail forward. Iteration is extremely critical. Keeping user at the center. I mean, I've said that many times, and I'll be an evangelist of that day in and day out. Having a team with balanced set of skills is again a critical component of this success. Agile methods complement very well with human-centered design, and I would be a very strong proponent of continuing to drive that. Building a collaborative team built on trust and mutual respect. Showing sense of vulnerability, coming to the table with humility is important. I've been in dialogues where analytics leaders or engineering leaders have said that rigor gets in the way of execution. Like, we need to move away from that type of dialogue. Like, again, change is hard, and then we need to build trust in the organization, and ruthlessly, again, measure productivity by volume. By value that we're driving to the business, not volume. There are some great webinars I think II has done recently about how to evaluate the value driven by analytics, and I think maybe Lindsay can add those links to this one, because that's a whole topic on its own, so I didn't want to touch on that. I just wanted to keep it a little bit focused on this. So to end, essentially, recap this is having a culturally grounded strategic vision, having an adoption-driven org structure, seeing us as an enabling function, building a partnership based on trust across organization, focusing on winnable problems, and continues to drive measure value and then telling the story. And I know it was kind of fast, and I would love to continue this dialogue. I can be reached on LinkedIn. This is a topic very close to me, and let's continue this dialogue because the time is right to have this dialogue, and collectively we as an analytics community can help each other.
Great, thanks, Ahmer. I think we have time. One quick question I think we can get your perspective on before we have to sign off, that I've kind of mushed together several inquiries that came through, but the general point was around if you've got the exploratory and post-exploratory teams, if those are going to be different people or different teams, how does the handoff look? And another related question was about should you actually charter two different sets of teams to do those two phases, or would you have one team handle both?
It's a good question, and it depends on the team size and how much funding you have. In smaller enterprises, for me, it has been the same team going through the process end to end. In some cases, especially because to me, exploratory component is very critical. The post-exploratory setup like engineering component, sometimes I have been able to augment it with contractors. Other times I have been able to build partnership and relationship with the CIOs and the CTOs, and then beg and borrow resources to help move that forward. In larger organizations, I have had two different teams essentially doing the handoff with the same product owner managing the entire development end to end.
Awesome. That's great. That was a great answer. Thank you, Ahmer, so much for being here. Bill, thank you. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. We're going to call that a wrap on this presentation. Just a reminder, we will be sending out an audio recording, which is like a video of the slides with the context and the presentation throughout. We do not send out the slides themselves, just the video recording of it. That'll be in your inbox tomorrow. We will also be sharing some links to the other webinars that Ahmer mentioned in that email that's coming out tomorrow. And then also, it is the last day for our early bird pricing on our symposiums. So experts like Ahmer will be in Detroit with us this fall. You'll have a couple other thought leaders on everything from autonomous driving to the ethics of AI to how do you implement analytics within your organization at our symposium. So we have our fall analytics symposium, so please make sure if would like to join us for that you click on the link tomorrow and get the discounted pricing. I will again thank you, Ahmer, for being here, and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.